Hi, my name is Bogdan. I'm the president of Spartan Hackers, and I will be going through the interactive portion of the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript workshop. Before getting started, you should have a browser other than Safari downloaded and have installed Sublime Text. The reason for using a browser other than Safari is because Safari does not adhere to all of the standards of CSS3 and HTML5. So let's get started. First, we're going to have you open Sublime Text. I have a window open already. Now go to the directory where you want to create this project. I'm going to create it on my desktop right here, and I'm going to call it Spartan Hackers Workshop. Now I'm going to drag this folder into my Sublime Text window. Now we have our directory here where we will store our files. Go ahead and right click on that directory and choose New File. Now if we open up the Google Slides presentation and scroll to the bottom, let's go ahead and grab this text and paste it in that. Now we're going to save it and name it index.html. The reason we name it index.html is because servers, when running your website, look for this file as the home directory. It should be placed right at the root of your server, but we won't go into that. That's a talk for another time. So let's go ahead and save it inside of our Spartan Hackers Workshop folder. Now let's go back to that folder and open that file up. When you click on it, you should notice that it's going to open in your default browser. If your default browser is Safari, right click on the file and open with either Google Chrome or Firefox. So what you see here is very similar to what we had in the presentation. Just some plain text. We're going to transform this text to look something like this, where we have our own personal page. So how do we do that? We have our code over here, and let's do something simple. Let's change this title of the page that we see in the tab to say that this is our page. I'm going to change mine to Bogdan's page. Now, like I said in the presentation, changing this and saving this tells the browser that this page is Bogdan's page. Now let's go ahead and change the main heading right here to say our full name. My full name is Bogdan Pozderca. Go ahead and change that and refresh the page. So now that our name is displayed, how do we make this page look more similar to this page? Let's start by creating this header. Over in our index.html, we're going to introduce a new element called a div. This div acts like a container. So let's complete that container and put our h1 inside of it. Now, when we save this, nothing on our page should change. The reason why is because the div acts as a container and doesn't give any special properties to its child element, which in this case is the H1. So now let's go ahead and change the background of our header. Within the head tag, we are going to use a new element called a style tag. This style tag houses all of the CSS that we will be using. Let's go ahead and type that. Now you may have noticed that Sublime Text has this pop-up. When you hit enter, it will auto-complete what you are typing, which saves you a lot of time. Now, within this style tag, let's write some CSS for our div. We're going to change the background of the div. Now the syntax requires you to address the element, which in this case is a div, have an open curly bracket, and finish it with a closed curly bracket. Within this, we provide our rules. In this case, we want to change the background color, and it's as simple as background hyphen color. As you can see, there is a colon and a semicolon. After the colon, you can type in black, blue, green, whatever you would like. You can also choose to use hex colors. Now, if you go to colorpicker.com, you can choose whatever color you'd like, and up at the top is its hex value. Notice that there's a hashtag in front of it. That hashtag is required for the CSS to work. So hashtag this code followed by its semicolon should produce that color behind my element. So I'm going to go ahead and save that and go to my page. Upon reloading it, the background color has changed. Now you may notice that there is this white space along the side and the top. The white space along the top is due to our H1 element having margin on the top and the bottom. We'll talk about that a little later in the presentation, but first let's get rid of the padding on the side. Now this is due to the browser having its own special formatting, so we will fix this by adding some CSS on the body. On the body, we want to have a margin of 0 pixels and padding of 0 pixels on all sides. Now, upon refreshing, that padding should be gone on the sides. Going back to our final, we can see that this has a height of about 100 pixels. Let's go ahead and change that and give our page a height of 100 pixels. Relatively simple. Within our div, height, give it 100 pixels, and that should give us what we would like. Now let's remove that white space from the top. There's two ways we can do this. We can remove the margin from our H1 and give it 0 pixels, and that should give us our effect. What we can also do is introduce a styling called Flexbox. Now Flexbox is something new to CSS 3 and isn't completely supported by Safari. but it makes things very easy. If you'd like to learn more about Flexbox outside of this presentation, just simply search Flexbox on Google. So let's start using it for our page. Right now, our page looks like this, with the margin at the top. Within our div, we're going to have our div display in a flex position. We want the items inside of our div, which right now is just this H1, to align to the center. So align items center, and then we finish it with our semicolon. Let's go ahead and save this and see that we now have the margin removed, as well as our header centered within its container. Let's go ahead and change the color of that header so that it fits with the background color. You can do that by calling the H1 and creating a rule for it. Now to change the text color, you just need to type in color, and just like with background color, you can either use hex or you can simply type the color. Let's go ahead and type white and finish with the semicolon, save this, and refresh. We now have white text in our header. Now let's go ahead and add an image to our header. We're going to do this by going into our div and creating a new element. This is known as an image element, and it's different from all the elements that we have currently. Currently, all of our elements start with an opening tag and end with a closing tag. The image tag does not have a closing tag. It is known as a self-closing element. Now you can see that upon autocomplete, we have this src equals quote quote. That's known as an attribute and will house the source to our image. Now I'm going to go to Google and search my name. Hey, there's a picture of me. Let's go ahead and grab the URL for this, copy it, and put it between those quotes. When I save this and go to my page, my image should appear. Go ahead and do that and refresh the page. As you can see, the image retains its width and height. Let's fix that by giving it a fixed height. Just like before, within our style tags, we're going to create a rule on the image element. This rule is going to be a width of 50 pixels as well as a height of 50 pixels. Now, if you leave the height blank, it will auto assign a height depending on the width with respect to its aspect ratios. Now, my image is square, so this isn't a problem. Go ahead and save this, and when you refresh, there's a small image center aligned within our div. Going back to our final page, we can see that there's spacing between all of these elements. Let's go ahead and give some spacing between these. Again, we are going to use Flexbox for this, and within our div, we can justify the content within the div to be centered. So you use justify dash content center, and when you refresh, it has centered it. But that's not all we want. We want them separated. So instead of center, you can use space between, and that will put the maximum amount of space between the two objects that you have here. We don't want that. We want to have an even amount of space around each side of the objects. So if we save this and refresh, the spacing here is identical to half the spacing of this, which is identical to to the spacing from the edge of the browser to the beginning of my name. Let's take a break from creating our header and center some of this text. Hey, this is my page. Let me know what you think. Now we have this text right here. So let's go ahead and center it. Going down here, we can see this text. Now let's change it. Paste, save it. See that it's been reflected on our page. We notice that this is a p tag, or a paragraph tag. So let's tell it to be centered. We're going to use text align center for this, since we are just manipulating the text. Upon saving it and refreshing, notice what happens. All of our paragraph elements have been centered. So how do we just have the very first paragraph center? Well, in our CSS, we'll have to identify it. So if we go to our paragraph element, we can give it an attribute of an ID. Let's autocomplete that. In between the quotes, let's call it intro. Now, instead of applying text align center to all of our P elements, we want to only apply it to intro. We don't want to just type intro. We need to tell the browser that this is an ID. And the way you tell it that this is an ID is by putting a hashtag in front of it. Now if we save this and refresh the page, we just have this very first paragraph centered. So now, let's go ahead and create our education and work experience boxes. The way we're going to do that is we're going to have this subheading paired with this paragraph. The way we could do that is making them child elements of a div. So we create our div here and take our paragraph and paste it between it. Now, the way I tabbed all of these is by highlighting a chunk of text and pressing tab. If you hold shift and press tab, it will go back. So now that we have put our H2 and our P elements inside of this div, when we save it, like before, nothing should happen. Oh no. As you can see, it has a blue background. Now let's create our education and works experience boxes. The way we're going to do that is we're going to pair this subheading with its paragraph and do the same with this pair. In our code, we're going to take that H2 and that paragraph and put them inside of a div. I'm going to copy and paste it inside of there. Now if you highlight a chunk of text and press tab, it will move it all over for you. Now, like before, when we save this and refresh, nothing should have changed. But in fact, it has changed. The reason for this is because of the rule that we have set up top, that for all divs the background color should be this and the height should be 100 and so on. The way we need to change this is by specifying that this rule applies to a header. So going back to our first div, let's give it an ID of header. Now when we save, we should be back to where we started. So let's go ahead and call our newly created div with our header and our paragraph edu. Now go ahead and do the same for this pair. In this case, we will give it an ID of work. So the first thing we're going to do is create a rule for border. Now we want these elements to look the same, so we can apply these rules to both elements by separating their identification by a comma. Now let's give it a border. We want to specify that this is a solid border of 1 pixel, and the next attribute is a color. This one is optional. You can say white, black, any written color, or you can use a hex color and RGB if you know what that is. If you leave it blank, it will default to black, which is what we want. So I will go save this, and we should have borders around both of them. Now you may see that this border is thicker than the others. This is because the top of this element and the bottom of this element have borders that touch. Looking at our final page, we can see that both education and work experience have the same width, as well as height. Let's focus on that width. Under our border, we can give it a width. Now, earlier we used pixels. We can use percentages now, or pixels. So let's give it a width of 30%. What this means is it will take up 30% of its container. Now when we refresh the page, we can see that they are both 30% of the container, which in this case is our div. Our div is taking up the entire width of the browser. So now we want these two divs to be side by side. The way we can do that is by using Flexbox, and by putting them both within a container. So let's go ahead and create a div around both of our divs. So now we have created this div, and like before, nothing will have changed. We want to call this a wrap because we're wrapping other elements. This wrap we're going to reuse for personal project. Generally, you're not supposed to use the same ID for multiple elements. If that is the case and the same rules apply to a range of elements, you want to use a class. So let's go ahead and call this class wrap. The way you tell the browser that you are talking about a class is by using a period instead of a hashtag. So we want this wrap to display as flex. Now by default, display flex puts them side by side. So if we want them centered, we're going to have to justify their content center. And now we have them centered, but with no padding between them. Excuse me, by padding I meant margin. So let's give it some margin. If we edit the rule for edu and work, we can change the margin to be 10 pixels all around and end it with our semicolon. If we save this, we have our spacing. But looking back at this, we can see that there's padding within our div. So we want to pad the elements inside of our container by 10 pixels, and we can do that by adding padding of 10 pixels. Oops. And there we are. They are no longer hugging the edge. Now let's go back and finish our header. We want to add Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn to our header. So the way we're going to do that is getting inside of this header div, and after our name, we're going to add what's known as an anchor tag. An anchor tag is a link. As you can see, it has an attribute of href, which will be our redirection. So in this case, we're going to create a Facebook redirection. So let's go to Facebook and grab our link. Let's go ahead and copy that and paste it here. In addition to that, we want to have an image instead of text. So we're going to, within the anchor tag element, we're going to add an image. Just like before, we need a source for the image. So let's Google a Facebook icon. I'm going to go ahead and grab this one, take its URL, and paste it right here. Before we set the rule that all images have a width of 50 pixels and a height of 50 pixels, we don't want that to apply to Facebook. So instead, let's change this to apply to our profile pic, and go ahead and change our profile pic to have an ID of profile underscore pic. Now we know that our Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn icons will all be the same height and width. So in this case, we want those to have a class of social image. So let's go ahead and create a rule for social image underscore image and say that the width is 25 pixels and the height is 25 pixels. Now if we go down to our Facebook image, let's go ahead and give it the class social underscore image and save that. Upon refreshing our page, we should have our Facebook link. And when we click it, it goes to Facebook. Now, if we want it to open a new tab instead of going in the current tab, we add another attribute called target. So target equals quote underscore blank end quote. Now when we refresh our page and click on the Facebook icon, we should be redirected. Whoops. Excuse me. I put that on the wrong element. I meant to put it on the anchor tag because that is what is doing the redirection. So, upon reloading our page, now that we click this, it should open a new tab and we still have our page open. Let's go ahead and create our Twitter and our LinkedIn. I've already opened an image of Twitter, so I'm going to copy that in a second, but first I will use this code and replace the source of the image with the Twitter image and change the redirect link to twitter.com/my Twitter profile. Let's do the same thing for our LinkedIn. Alright, now that I've finished this, let's go ahead and refresh our page. What you'll notice is that the spacing, oops, I've used a broken image. As you'll notice, the spacing between all of our elements also applies to our links. The way we can fix that is by grouping all of our links together within a container. As you've guessed it, it's a div. Now, we have no use for, we don't have any rules for this div, so we aren't going to give it an ID. What it will do is have them grouped together like this. Now, when we look at our page, there's some spacing between the elements. We can do that by giving our Twitter anchor tag an ID that states this is Twitter. So let's give it a rule. For Twitter, we want it to have padding on its left and its right side. Now when we use padding, we can specify padding bottom, top, left, right, and give it a pixel value. Instead, we're just going to use padding, and when you give it just one value, it applies that value to all four sides of the element. If you give it two values, the first value applies to the top and the bottom, while the second applies to the left and the right. If you give it 4, it will apply padding in the order that starts as so: top, right, bottom, left. So clockwise starting from the top. We only want it for the left and the right, so we're going to give padding of 0 to the top and the bottom, and a padding of 10 to the left and the right. So when we save this, we can see that we have our padding. Now these icons don't look too great on this background, so I'm going to change this and use the background we have here, which I have a color picker. Oh no, it won't let me pick this color. You can view the source of any page by doing so, and so I'm going to grab this color from right here. Now this looks more like our page. Let's go ahead and format our edu to look more like this. We want to have education, our GPA, and our college. So let's first start this by changing the header to say education. Now we want to have GPA right next to it. So let's do that by creating a div. Now between our opening and our closing div tag, we can have text. This text is known as inner HTML. So let's type in our GPA. Let's format this a little bit better. And let's go ahead and move our H2 above that GPA and see what that looks like. Let's move that GPA over onto the same line as our education. We can do that by using Flexbox again. Now let's give this an ID of edu_wrap. So just like before, we're going to create edu_wrap rules. So the first thing we want to do is give it a display of flex. That should have our items be on the same line. Oh no, the GPA is higher. So what we're going to do is have that align to the center. So we're going to align all the items to the center. Whoop. Centered vertically. And finally, we want our GPA on the other side. This is where we want to use space between instead of space around. So justify that content with space between. Here we are. We've moved that. Let's go ahead and remove that paragraph and replace it with a list. So we're going to use the element UL, which is an unordered list, and within that we're going to have list elements. Let's go ahead and create 3 of those. And the first one will say Michigan State University. The second one will say College of Engineering. And hopefully the third one will say Computer Science. So if we save that and refresh, we can see we have bullet points and padding around it. The way we're going to get around that is by modifying how unordered lists and list elements are handled. So we're going to create a rule for UL. UL is going to have a margin of 0 pixels and padding of 0 pixels as well. Upon saving that, we now have our text aligned vertically, but we still have these ugly bullet points. Let's get rid of those. So for list, what we're going to want to do is have a list style type of none. On saving that, we have that happen. Looking at our final, we can see that there is indentation here. Let's go ahead and add indentation. We're going to do that by giving these 2 final LIs a class of sub LI. Now the rule that we're going to write for sub LI is we're going to give it margin left of 10 pixels, which will move those 2 elements over by 10 pixels. So if we do a period to denote that this is a class, type in the class name, curly braces, and have a margin left of 10 pixels, we should have our education column finished. Now let's finish up this other box with our work experience. Just looking at this, we have our main header, which is our H2. We have what looks like an H3, some quick information, and a description of the work. Let's go ahead and do that. Let's first change the H2 to work experience. And let's add an H3. This one, in my case, is matrix, because I work at matrix. Now, what we want to do is have a subtext, which in this case will be a paragraph, that says website developer. And this last paragraph text will have our description. When I save this and check out our page, we have almost the formatting that we want. We want to have our website developer hug our H3, and that should be enough. Now you may recall that earlier I mentioned that header tags have margins on the top and the bottom. The way we are going to remove this space between website developer and matrix is by first identifying matrix by giving it an ID of matrix, and by giving our P an ID of brief words. So in our CSS, we're going to have matrix have a margin on the bottom of 0 pixels, and we're going to have our brief words as margin top 0 pixels. Let's go ahead and save that, and our work experience is done. So before we move on and create our personal projects, we can see that our CSS is getting to be pretty large. What we can do is call our CSS from a separate file by introducing link. Link, as you can see, has these attributes. The relation that this file that we're introducing has to our current document, which in this case is index.html. We're specifying that we are introducing a style sheet that is of type text and CSS. Let's go ahead and create a new document by double-clicking on our header up here, or by right-clicking on our folder and creating a new file. Let's go ahead and cut everything from within our style element and paste it in this file. When we go ahead and save this, we want to save this as index.css. The reason we're calling it index.css is because these are the CSS rules for the index file. If we have a different HTML file, we want to have its CSS file have the same name. So let's go ahead and save this in our Spartan Hackers Workshop folder. And as you can see, Sublime has noticed that this is CSS and has applied some syntax to it. Back to our index.html. For this href, we're going to specify index.css. And we can go ahead and remove this style tag. Now we have much less code, and it's a little bit cleaner by separating our CSS and our HTML. Let's go ahead and save our HTML and refresh our page, As you can see, everything is loading just as it was before. Now let's get back to our project and create our personal project piece of the page. Now I mentioned earlier that we would be reusing this class called wrap. Let's go ahead and do that underneath the first wrap. And within that div, we'll create a new div with the ID of projects. Now looking back, we have a header, and then we have two projects here. So having these two projects tells me that we should have two divs within projects. So let's go ahead and create two more divs within projects. We'll give this first one a name of Audiolize, and the second one a name of Spartan Hack 2016 website. Now let's go ahead and save this and see where we are. We refresh. We have Audiolize and we have Spartan Hack 2016 website. Let's go ahead and give projects a width of 60% by going to our index.css and adding that rule. The reason I choose 60% is because the education and work experience blocks are both 30% in width. So when we save this, we should see that Audiolize and Spartan Hack 2016 website have moved over. Let's go ahead and give this a bit of a border. And this border should be similar to the one that we introduced to education and web experience, or work experience, where it is solid, 1 pixel, and black. Now we can see that we're almost there. We want this border to go all the way to the edge, so we're going to give padding to both the top and bottom and left and right of projects. So padding on the top and bottom, let's give it 10 pixels. For the left and right, let's play around with it until we get what we want. Let's start with 28 pixels. Save this. Oh, not quite big enough. Let's move up 2 to 30. Refresh. Almost 32. That looks just about right. So now we need a title. Let's go ahead and give projects an H2 and call it personal projects. As you've probably guessed, to get Audiolize and Spartan Hack 2016 website on the same level, we are going to put them inside of another div. So if we go down here, let's create a new div under h2 and take both Spartan Hack 2016 and Audiolize and place them within that div. Now this div, we want it to act like a wrap. So we're going to give it the class of wrap. So when we save this and refresh, we can see that they have been placed on the same line and are centered. But we don't want them to be centered. We want them to have space around. So the way we can do that without modifying the class wrap and having every element with the class wrap change is giving it an ID of project wrap. So now project wrap, we can give it a justify content of space between. Whoops, forgot to save both documents, and when we refresh, we have them spaced apart. Alright, so let's give each of our elements some descriptive text. They are paragraph elements, so each div, Audiolize, and Spartan Hack will get p tags. I'm going to go ahead and copy that text and paste it within each tag. And now, I'm going to save this and reload my page and see what happens. As you can see, we're almost there. Let's go ahead and get our two projects and do some CSS on them. Since they are pretty much going to have the same CSS, we'll give them a class of project. And in our index.css, the project class is going to have a width of 45%. Now what I forgot to mention about percentages with width is that as the browser window changes, so does that element. So using width of a percentage makes our website a little bit responsive. Now we're almost done. We just need to add some spacing here so that it matches the spacing between education and work experience. We're simply going to give our whole projects div a margin top of 10 pixels should be fine. Save and refresh. That looks about right. Now let's look at our page and the final page and see if we missed anything. We seem to have missed a border of roughly 2 pixels up here, and this click me button that I will get to in a minute. Let's go ahead and add this border. This border we're going to add to our header by using border bottom, and just like border, we can do solid, in this case 2 pixels, and save it, and that should have that effect. Now this click me, I'm going to introduce you to a little bit of JavaScript. Like I mentioned in the presentation, JavaScript allows you to do dynamic things on the website. So by clicking this, I'm going to hide personal projects, and clicking it again, I'm going to display it. Let's go ahead and just create that button for right now by going to our index.html, scrolling to the bottom, and we want this button to be centered underneath personal project. So just like before, we're going to reuse this class. And to make that button, the element is called button. So let's type in click me and save this. Now we have that button, but with no functionality. So when we click this button, we want it to do something. So let's add the attribute on click. We want it to call a function. Now, you're probably wondering, where is this function coming from? Well, we have to create the function. So let's go back up to our head and create a new element called script. Now you can see the script has a type of text/JavaScript, and within this we can create that function with the function name toggle projects. And we don't want an argument, but inside of it, before we have it toggle our project, let's have it just open a pop-up. If you use alert, within alert you can type out a message and so now when we click on click me, we get an alert. We can also replace alert with prompt and ask a question. What is your name? And now we get a prompt to type in our name. We can take that a step further and set that to a variable. You can say variable name equals prompt, and then let's have a second alert that outputs that name. So my name is Bogdan, press OK, and now my name has been popped up. When you're writing JavaScript, debugging your errors in code can be annoying if you have to create an alert every single time. Instead, you can output variables to a debugging console by using console.log and putting your variable within it. So let's go ahead and do that. Refresh our page and press click me. So now when I type in my name and press OK, nothing happens. But in fact, something has happened. If you right-click on the page and press Inspect Element, what will happen is these developer tools will pop up where you can look at the body and see this div is the header and see how much the header takes up. It gives you some information such as the width and the height of the header. You can on the side see what CSS is applied to it and turn it off or on. In addition, when you're viewing the debugging console of any page, you can go ahead and change things. So if I go to google.com, inspect its element, I can look at the head, find the title, and say Bogdan hacked Google. So now when I look at the page, the title is Bogdan hacked Google. So back to our page. When I inspect the element and go to the console, I can see that my name was outputted after I had entered it. Over here it says index.html:10. When you click on that, it will show you where that variable was output from. So let's go ahead and change our code to hide our projects. We can do that by saying document, which is in reference to the web page, .get element by ID, and that ID is project. Now we want to change its style, so .style, and then we want to change its visibility, .visibility. This value is equal to hidden. When we save this and refresh, once we click me, projects should disappear. Now, clicking it again won't do anything. What we need to do is set up a check to see if the element is hidden or not. We can do that by creating a variable called isVisible, and when the page is loaded, we know that that will be true. Now, JavaScript has you can do conditional statements, loops, just about everything that you can do in Python or any other language, you can do in JavaScript. So we want to say if is visible, we want the document to become hidden. And we want is visible to become false. If the element is not visible, we want document.get element by ID projects dot style dot visibility to equal visible. In addition to that, we want is visible to be equal to true. Upon saving this and reloading our page, we should be able to toggle personal projects on and off. Now this is a very basic tutorial on JavaScript. Later on in the semester we will have a workshop dedicated to teaching JavaScript. As for this workshop, that is all. Thank you to everyone who attended the workshop, as well as those who watched this video.